Sometimes defenses are the deciding factor in what wins you a week and what makes you lose a week, which is unfortunate, but it is true. Lucky for you, in this video, I'll give you a tier list of every single defense that you need to be starting in week 5, as well as a list of defenses that are bottom 5 you need to make sure you do not have in your starting lineup or anywhere near your roster. And if you stream your defenses, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss this video every single week, and hit that like button while you are here. It helps me out a ton as a person, as a creator. I really do appreciate you guys. But starting in the S tier, the best defense this week is going to be the Denver Broncos. They weren't really rostered in that many leagues in the beginning of the week, so the numbers still might be low, but it's a great matchup against the Raiders, who are 99% going to be playing without Davante Adams if he's not already ruled out. Like, he's not going to play. He wants a trade. He says it's a hamstring injury. I don't think so. He just doesn't want to play on this team. He wants to be traded. If they have no Davante Adams, they're going to lean on Jakobi Meyers. They're playing against the Broncos, who have PS2. If you guys have been in any of these videos before, Patrick Surtain is the literal best corner in stopping every single wide receiver 1 this year. He's held DK to 5. He's held Mike Evans to 3. He's held Garrett Wilson last week to, I think, 7. The highest points he's ever allowed was George Pickens, and he had 7.3 or something like that. He is very, very good. This Broncos defense is great. They're averaging 4 sacks a game and 10.7 fantasy points through 4 weeks of the year. So all of that makes them the S tier. We got to jump down to the A tier here to rank the rest of these guys. We are going to have the Seahawks, the Dolphins, the Vikings, and the Commanders all tied in this tier. The Seahawks are a bit of a shaky one. I would have them higher in the S tier if they were actually fully healthy. We saw last week the Lions put up a huge amount of points against them. I'm not taking that for what it was, though. Since the Geno and Jared Goff era, that matchup has always been high scoring. It's just what happens. But it does hurt and lower their ceiling that they're missing so many players on that defense. The coaching is still good. They have some fine replacement guys, but their ceiling is lower and they're not in the S tier. But they do get a really good matchup against the Giants, and it doesn't look like Malik Nabers is going to play this week with a concussion, so that's lowering the offensive ability of the Giants even more if you have to rely on Devin Singletary and Wan'Dale Robinson, who might not even be playing this week either because he's also questionable. It's a great matchup even if they are dealing with injuries. The Dolphins are another good one because they're playing against the Patriots, who have an abysmal offense. It's just terrible. I know all of us know this. I don't have to talk about it anymore. Their offensive line sucks, which means more sacks for the defense here. That's already a plus. The Patriots let up a good amount of sacks already. This one does have a little bit of red flags because the Dolphins did allow a good amount of points to Will Levis and Mason Rudolph last week, but this matchup should be more smooth. Both of the offenses for the Patriots and the Dolphins really do suck right now, so it's going to be low scoring. That's plus fantasy points for you there. The sacks are going to be there. That's plus fantasy points again. Ramondre has had a fumble in every single game. Another situation where you have plus fantasy points. It looks like Antonio Gibson is going to open as the RB1 starter for them. That is a stash. If you guys haven't seen that video, I just posted yesterday a video of the players we need to be stashing ahead of Sunday. Go ahead and check out that video. Gibson is by far a very, very good stash. Trey Tucker as well. The defense has been a little bit hit or miss so far, but they have played some really, really good competition in the Bills and the Seahawks. I have them projected for 8.3 fantasy points. That's followed by the Vikings, who get a pretty tough matchup, I'm not going to lie, against the Jets. Their offense is above average, even though they looked absolutely terrible against the Broncos last week. But this Brian Flores defense is insanely versatile. They disguise their coverages so well. They blitz at a good rate, and they have success on blitzes at a good rate, making it really hard for quarterbacks to read and expect what's going to happen that play. Now, if anybody's going to be able to read that defense, it will be Aaron Rodgers, but he's older, he's not mobile, he's slower, the offensive line isn't the best, which again will lead to more sacks, which means fantasy points. And unlike some of these other defenses, they are very solid in their own, and they force turnovers. They don't have to rely on this game to be low scoring. Have them safely projected for 8.25 points this week. I do not expect Davante Adams to go to the Jets this week and play for them now. If that does happen, we'd probably be moving the Vikings defense down a bit. But the Commanders next up here, as a fan, I do not want to put them here. The matchup is okay, but I don't want to trust it. It's definitely the riskiest so far. The only thing is, they get a matchup against a struggling Deshaun Watson team in the Browns who do not look amazing. The Browns allow the 3rd most points to opposing defenses because of the combination of sacks, turnovers, fumbles, points allowed. Like, it's just really bad. And the Commanders offense has been on fire lately, so if they can keep the offense moving, it's going to force Deshaun Watson to keep passing, which he's been having to do every game. They can't run the ball and play slow because they're down in these games, and Deshaun Watson is very turnover prone. We know this. This one is more risky though because the Commanders defense in their own do not force a bunch of turnovers. Their defense isn't very versatile, so it's depending on this game staying low scoring for the Browns side, which it is, but it's definitely less safe. I have them projected for 8 fantasy points, and this week's defenses are really volatile. Every week there's usually a clear top 5. This week is a little bit different, so I wanted to make this defensive ranking video. Next up in this B tier moving down, I do have the Bears. They are as well hit or miss a little bit, but the defense has been solid on their own, averaging 2 turnovers per game and 2.5 sacks. And Andy Dalton isn't immune to turning the ball over. He has 1 interception in his 2 games. The Panthers offensive line is also bad. Again, more sacks is more fantasy points, and I do expect Andy Dalton and this offense to just come back down to earth a little bit more every single week. I was talking about that ever since the week 1 matchup. It's just kind of how it works. Still definitely way better off than they would be with Bryce Young, but the Bears have a good defensive line. Their secondary isn't necessarily terrible, and the only wide receivers of comparable value that they have to deal with is Xavier Legette and Deontay Johnson. They're definitely not the best receivers in the world with the most separation, but there's nobody else. No tight ends or wide receiver 3s get separation. And next up, we're going to be taking the Patriots, which might seem a little bit odd because they play the Dolphins. If you would have said that in week 1, this would not be a defense you're starting. But Tyler Huntley does not look good, and this entire offense is very, very risky. With that being said, I do expect the Dolphins to look better in their second week with Tyler Huntley, just to get more acclimated into this offense and the speed of real NFL games with Tyreek Hill and Waddle on the team, but not by much. This Patriots defense is good. They're really crazily just restricted by their offense. They cannot stay on the field, which makes their defense stay on the field. They don't get a chance to rest. Like, these are real human beings that we're talking about. And the sports books have the Dolphins offense to not be that electric. This game is projected to be a very, very low scoring game. That equals fantasy points. And we do have Christian Gonzalez on Tyreek Hill. So it's not like a bad matchup where we have a Benjamin St-Juste on Tyreek Hill. But on the other side of the ball, for the Jets matchup, we're taking them against the Vikings this week. Now, the Vikings are a pretty good offense. They are undefeated. But outside of last week for the Jets against the Broncos, which that game can pretty much be forgotten about because it was so bad on both sides, I don't even count it as existing. They're averaging 5 sacks a game, and their secondary is even better than that. Now, the 5 sack a game number has to come down eventually. Like, it's pretty good. It's upside. Their secondary is good. Sauce Gardner is a great guy. He can hold Justin Jefferson if anybody's going to do it. And Sam Darnold is one of the more turnover-prone quarterbacks. He's thrown an interception in 3 out of the 4 games this year. And it is a very tough matchup for him. The Jets are bottom 5 in points allowed to quarterbacks this year. That's making them a fine play. But the 49ers are next up in here, and they might seem a little bit low because of the name value and because of what they did last week against the Patriots. 26 fantasy points dropped, 4 forced fumbles, an interception, and a touchdown. Like, it was just absolutely amazing for them. But this week's going to be a little bit tougher because they get a matchup against the Cardinals, who even knows what's happening with that offense at this point. They only dropped 14 on a Commanders defense who is widely known to be the worst defense in the league. But then sometimes they play really good. Now, Trey McBride is going to come back this week, and I do credit a good amount of their inconsistency last week for that. But the Cardinals' offensive line is not good by any means. Bosa is very good by all means. There should be a good amount of sack opportunities, even if Kyler Murray is a mobile quarterback. They're averaging 3.5 sacks through 4 games so far. The Cardinals' defense is also really bad, so Kyler's going to have to keep passing to keep them in, which means more interception chances for them. And the Colts are the next defense here that possibly is the most toss-up of all matchups this week because they get the Jaguars, who they've looked absolutely terrible through 4 weeks. But last week, they actually showed some signs of offense and some signs of light. So this Jaguars offense could just look absolutely amazing. I don't think that's a very probable assumption to make. If the Colts continue to play decent football and the Jaguars continue to be absolutely inefficient, this is going to be a good matchup. But again, if the Jaguars decide to learn how to play football, they're probably only going to get a couple points. They do get a matchup against the Titans in week 6, and the Dolphins followed that in week 7. So it is a good stash defense as well if you want it. And you can't really take their fantasy point per game number away from them because they've had some pretty tough defensive matchups. And they are still averaging 3 sacks a game with 2 turnovers forced. But next up is going to be the Packers, who may not be the best NFL defense. They have not proven that. They allow a good amount of points, but they get a lot of turnovers. If you guys saw the waiver wire video last week, I had them in there. They are number 1 in turnovers forced in the NFL. They're averaging 3.3 sacks per game. But what makes this great is that the Rams offense has just been absolutely terrible without Cooper Kupp and without Puka. I mean, that's not really too crazy to say, but this is really, really bad. The Rams have allowed the second most points to opposing defenses so far this year. Their offensive line is terrible. They have so many injuries, and that really hurts when you have a Matthew Stafford that is not mobile. The opposite of being a mobile quarterback. The Packers have really good players on both sides of the defense, and the defensive line and the secondary, obviously with Jair Alexander. They've also been a very turnover-prone team without Cooper Kupp and Puka, so it's just a great situation. I honestly might want to move them up in these rankings. Then we get the Ravens, who have a matchup against the Bengals, who have looked bad so far. I think we all expect the Bengals to look a little bit better as the year goes on, but they haven't really looked good against bad teams. And the Ravens defense has been good against very tough matchups. They're averaging 7 fantasy points a game against the Chiefs, against the Raiders, which, that doesn't really count, but against the Cowboys and the Bills in those 4 games. That's pretty good comp. They get a breather with the Bengals in a divisional matchup. Those games tend to stay a little bit lower scoring, so that point total will be there for your fantasy points. And the Ravens are amazing at generating sacks. We know the Bengals offensive line has some holes in it. Then we'll drop it down to the bottom 5 defenses here. These are the teams you need to make sure you don't have anywhere near your starting lineup. If you want, sell your league mates on them. Maybe tell them to start them. Like, make them think they're good defenses because they might just get negative points. And we're going to have the Texans at 5, which this defense on its own isn't necessarily terrible. But the matchup against the Bills has so much downside with Josh Allen. He's a mobile quarterback. He's not really going to get sacked a whole ton, and they're projected for a lot of points. Even though they have been hit or miss for the past few weeks, they didn't do good last week. Josh Allen only put up 7 fantasy points. But even in the Texans' previous games, they are completely hit or miss. The Texans aren't going to hold the Bills under 20 points, so you can rule that fantasy point number out. Josh Allen is going to score a lot. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the league, so you're pretty much waiting for him to throw an interception to get your fantasy points. He has not thrown an interception once this year. Now, is that because he's gotten so much better, or is it because he's not throwing a lot and his pass volume is down because there's no Stephon Diggs or Gabe Davis? Both of those might be true. Either way, he's not going to turn the ball over. But the fourth worst defense this week is the Rams, and they are absolutely doomed against the Packers offense. That offense is good. Jordan Love is healthy again. Dontavian Wicks is breaking out. Jordan Reed looks fine. We don't have Christian Watson, but who cares? He's not that great anyways. The Rams defense is 27th in points per game. They are averaging 3.25 fantasy points per contest. They can't generate sacks without Aaron Donald. They barely get turnovers. Their pressure rate and success blitz rate is one of the lowest in the league. It's a similar situation to the Bills where they're just not going to be able to stop offenses. But cracking into the bottom 3, we are not taking the Bengals either. They get a matchup against the Ravens, who are the second hardest to opposing defenses. And the Bengals have just been atrocious on their own. 1 sack against the Patriots, who are a depleted team. 2 sacks against the Chiefs, 2 sacks against Washington, and none against the Panthers. Not a single sack. That defense is allowing 26 points per game to some pretty bad offenses, or at least not proven ones. They haven't been able to prove themselves in those bad matchups. Now they get a tough one against the Ravens, who have a really good offense, who are going to run the ball, keep this game low scoring. But in the bottom 2, we're going to have the Giants, who get a matchup against the Seahawks, who is a really, really good offense. We saw last week they can score. Kenneth Walker is healthy. It makes this offense so much more two-dimensional. And the Giants had a good matchup, and the Giants had a good game against the Browns, but they actually ended up winning. Everything else outside of that was terrible defense and fantasy football point-wise. They have some really tough matchups coming up in the next few weeks as well, so even if you are a Giants fan, it just doesn't make sense to roster them. But the number 1 worst defense to get as far away from your roster as humanly possible, do not get them on your team. It's going to be the Cardinals. If you got them, get rid of them. And outside of their week 2 matchup against the Rams, who are allowing some of the most points to opposing defenses, they're averaging 5 points a game, even putting up negative points in some situations. Now it doesn't help that they get a matchup against the 49ers, who don't turn the ball over. They play relatively slow with their run volume, and they have Brandon Ayuk. They have Deebo Samuel healthy. Even Juwan Jennings coming into his own. They have a lot of weapons and a lot of options. The Cardinals secondary is very much depleted. They let a Commanders team that hasn't yet been proven put up 42 points on them. The Cardinals are the 3rd easiest defense to play against so far this year in blitz rate, success blitz rate, fantasy points allowed, and just general quarterback, wide receiver, and running back fantasy points allowed per game. It is a great, great situation to play against them, but not where you want to be starting their defense. Thank you guys for listening into this video. I appreciate you, and I will see you in the next one coming soon.